Hi, everyone. We'll get started shortly. We're just going to wait another minute or two while people are signing in. If you'd like, while we're waiting, you can type in the chat window and let us know where you're dialing in from today. Okay, say a quick welcome message from our presenter, Kerry, there. Again, if you want to include anything in the chat window, that's available on your GoToWebinar panel, as well as the question pane for submitting questions for Kerry. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for another It's Learning webinar. This time on data-informed learning and student data privacy, 10 tips for teachers. My name is Jill Davis, and I will be moderating today's presentation. Please ask questions at any time through the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will do our best to answer them during the Q&A at the end of today's presentation. We will also be sending out a link of this recording following the presentation. I'd now like to introduce our presenter. I'm pleased to present Kerry Gallagher. Kerry is Director of K-12 Education for ConnectSafely.org, in addition to her full-time role as Digital Learning Specialist at St. John's Prep in Danvers, Massachusetts. St. John's is a one-to-one iPad school serving 1,500 students grades 6 through 12. Kerry taught middle and high school history in Bring Your Own Device public schools for 13 years. She was best known for her paperless collaborative classroom model and has helped schools create student-driven technology integration programs. Kerry received the 2014 Yale Lynn Hall Teacher Action Research Prize for her submission on the use of mobile devices for a paperless public school classroom and is a 2015 PBS Learning Media Digital Innovator. Also in 2015, the Family Online Safety Institute recognized her with the Outstanding Achievement Award, and she was a MassCue featured educator. Kerry's blog, Start With a Question, was named among EdTech K-12's 50 must-read blogs for 2016. Most recently, Kerry was the opening Ignite speaker for ISTE's 2016 conference. She is a 2016 ASCD Emerging Leader and was awarded the 2016 MassCue Pathfinder Award for her leadership in education technology in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Kerry speaks and presents often about the effective and safe use of technology in the classroom at conference locations that have included Harvard Law School, Yale School of Management, and Stanford University. In addition to writing for Connect Safely, Kerry is an EdSurge columnist. She holds a BA in politics from St. Anselm College and JD from Massachusetts School of Law. You can find Kerry on Twitter at KerryHawk02. I will now turn things over to Kerry.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Hello, everybody. Let me just get my slide deck started. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're all here. I know that the topic of data privacy can be intimidating for classroom teachers. I'm actually at my school right now, and our middle school teachers are quite abuzz because it is parent conference week. And so the hallways are not only filled with our students, but with their parents all day, every day. And the idea of stopping to think about data privacy when you're planning lessons, planning conferences, trying to figure out how to integrate the tools effectively, it can seem pretty overwhelming, but it really is pretty easy. And I have broken it down into 10 tips based on the work that I've done both for Connect Safely, the internet safety nonprofit that I work with, and also for the teachers at my school to help them understand what data privacy really is and how it affects their work, how they can build their own data privacy literacy, and also teach it to their students. So that's what we're going to talk about today. First of all, I want to note that a lot of what I'm going to discuss today is available in a nice 12-page, easy-to-read guide called The Educator's Guide to Student Data Privacy that I co-authored with Kobe Pruitt from the Future Privacy Forum, and also with Connect Safely's CEO, Larry Magid. So my perspective as an educator and parent, Larry's perspective as an internet activist and technology journalist for the past several decades, and Kobe Pruitt as a legal expert from FPF, was a great combination, putting together something that was informative, approachable, and really helpful for teachers. This is Larry and myself. We really enjoy working together, and I think our combination of experience and work are a great combination. So my first tip for you, we'll get right down to the tips, is that we actually need data. So I think it's really easy to get frightened of the breaches to data privacy that we hear about all the time in the news. I think it's front and center in the news right now, as a matter of fact, and can be tempting to not use technology because of that fear, or to shut down all of our social media accounts, or to just avoid getting our students involved with technology because we don't want to take risks. But the truth is that we have been tracking data for decades, and we really need data in education. For instance, data just helps us get to know our students better. Basics like your name, your email address, the school that they attend, their birth date, their address at home, all of that is data that schools have been tracking for a long time. We even track health data, and that helps us understand student diagnoses for IEPs and 504s. We need to track their birth date to make sure that they're in the right grade or with the right age group. We need to track there's data that we track all the time that makes our life easier. For instance, there's efficiency data. So our student management system and our student information systems help streamline how we track all of our students' information, and we can look that up at the drop of a hat without really thinking about it. Teachers constantly use formative data, so using digital formative assessment tools to measure how much students are understanding. If there is clear misunderstanding among students, then you can change the course of your lesson right away. And without that data, you might not know until a week later that students weren't understanding those lessons. There's quantitative data. So this is the data that we collect on online gradebooks and post on progress reports. But then there's also qualitative data. So we collect the data that our students create when they make videos or digital posters or type up papers. Maybe we have them post those to digital portfolios, and that's all really great qualitative data to help them track their progress and to help us really see how they've grown over time. So in the same way that data benefits us as educators, it's also really important for technology companies to collect data. Without the data that they collect from their users, they wouldn't be able to turn around and make it available to us. So if you're using a platform like an LMS or a formative assessment platform, you need that platform to collect your students' data so that they can repackage it in a way that's easier for you to understand, and you can comb through it without having to look through pages and pages of spreadsheets. You can look at it in a more visual and useful way. We also need them to collect data from us and our students so that they can get feedback for how many clicks it takes for their users to accomplish a certain task, or which parts of their platform are more or less popular, and then they can develop the platform out better so that the user experience continues to be smooth. So all of us really need data. So it really isn't something to be afraid of, but it is important for us to know all the stakeholders who are involved when we're talking about data. So I think it's important to note that some of these stakeholders that I'm going to mention are going to be obvious, and some might be stakeholders that you hadn't thought of before. So one are parents. Parents are the ones who ultimately have the right to our students' data first, and at least until those students are 18 years old. And so it's important that we're really honest and open with them about which data we're collecting and how we're using it. And so those parent-teacher conferences I'm talking about that are happening right now, our teachers are sharing the data they've collected on the children with their parents and talking about how they as professional educators are interpreting it and using it to improve their child's education experience. Of course, teachers, administrators, The ed tech companies, like I mentioned before, all of those parties need to collect data in order to better understand students and users of technologies. But also law enforcement. When schools collect data about children, if law enforcement ever needs to get involved for any reason for the well-being of the child, they may request that data be turned over, and it's the obligation of the school to be able to retrieve that data and turn it over in those cases. Health officials sometimes share data with schools with parents' permission so that schools can better serve children. And so those are also people that we think about in education. But of course, the most important person when we're talking about the stakeholders for data privacy are our students. They're too young to make a lot of decisions about their own data privacy, so it's really our responsibility to teach them about it and also to protect them as best we can. So the rest of the tips are going to make it possible for you to do that. The first tip that I have for you, or the first tip to get you started, is to understand the acronyms. And these are the acronyms that are in all of the privacy policies and terms of use and that are thrown around by privacy advocates and policymakers and can be a little bit intimidating. So I'm going to kind of demystify these acronyms for you. And there are three big ones that you need to know about. The first is PII. So PII is student personal information. It's called personally identifiable information, and it includes anything about the student's identity, their academics, their medical conditions, anything else that's collected, stored, or communicated by schools or tech vendors on behalf of schools that's particular to that individual student. So if the information is collected by the ed tech company, but then aggregated and returned to the school without being tied to student identity, then it's not PII. It's only PII when the data is specifically tied to the student's name or ID number. A lot of times this includes basics like names of parents or guardians, the name or an address of the student, the date of birth, attendance, disciplinary records, eligibility for lunch programs. All of that is going to be tied to the student's identity. A lot of times it also includes data that's generated by students or teachers in classrooms. So this could be email accounts. If students are posting to online bulletin boards and their name is tied to their posting, any work that's performed in an app that you can then get back the data of the student tied to their name, that's PII because it's tied to their name. Really anything that's created about or by an individual student in an educational setting that's used to track their individual progress is PII. The next one that you need to know is FERPA. FERPA is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, and it was enacted in 1974. So even though we're using this same law decades later, it's still very much applicable to the work we do in schools. It guarantees that parents have access to their child's education record and restricts who can access and use certain student information. So if a parent requests all of the data that you've collected on their child, it's our obligation as educators to give it to them. So usually that's just, the work that's been graded and their grade record, but it could also include formative data that isn't part of their grade if parents ask for it. So just keep that in mind, that when parents ask for which information you're collecting or you're allowing digital tools to collect on their child, it is important for you to be ready to pull that up and share that with parents. The next one is COPPA. COPPA is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and this is a newer law, and it controls what information is collected from young children by the companies that operate websites, games, and mobile applications and services directed specifically toward children under 13. 13 seems to be a magic age in the privacy world when it comes to education technology, and 13 our children turn 13 somewhere between 7th and 8th grade. And so often middle school educators are the ones who are the most perplexed by all of these privacy restrictions and hoops that we have to jump through. And if you teach that 7th and 8th grade age group, it can be kind of tricky because some of your students are under 13 and some are over. And so there might be a tool that you want to use that really is only okay for your students who are over 13 to use. And you have to figure out either how to get parent permission or whether your school is going to permit you to use the tool at all under those circumstances. And I can talk more about the different scenarios if you all have questions specific to those. But COPPA compliance is really a must for education companies who are providing platforms that they intend for children to use in middle or elementary school. Otherwise, without COPPA compliance, they're really putting themselves at risk and the data of the children who are using their platform at risk. So my next tip for you is, with all of these laws and regulations that I've just shared with you, you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I already use so many tools with my students, and I have not checked to see if they collect PII, if they subscribe to FERPA and are willing to share data with my students' parents, or if they're COPPA compliant. What do I do? Am I in violation? And this tip is meant to kind of calm your fears. Don't worry too much about the institutional tools that are already adopted by your school across the board. Those are the ones that you're most likely using most anyway. So this means that these are tools that it's mandated that you're required to use. This might be your online gradebook, workflow and collaboration tools, so things like Google Drive or Microsoft 365, a learning management system that you've adopted, like It's Learning, any online gradebooks that are used to track grades and disseminate progress reports and grades to parents, or any communication tools that are meant to help render and deliver emails or newsletters. Those are regarded as institutional tools that are required for schools to adopt in order to do the business of education. So if you're using any of these tools because your school has provided them for you, you're good. They've been vetted by your tech department, they've been approved community-wide, and you don't have to worry too much. My next tip for you is to educate yourself on the basics of vetting the other tools that you adopt, the little apps that you find when you read other educator blogs, the tips and tricks that you find when you're hopping onto Pinterest and see a great idea for using an app that you've never tried before, or a program or website that you've never tried before. This is when these skills will come in handy. And by sharing the tips for vetting with you, I want to make sure that I'm specifying that I'm not asking you to vet the apps yourself, nor should the administrators in your school or your director of IT. Rather, it's important for you to build your own capacity, both as a teacher and as a citizen, to make sure that you understand what goes into the vetting process, so that maybe you can do a little preview of the vetting yourself and know whether or not something is likely to be approved, but also so that you can start reading the privacy policies and terms of use documents for the services that you use in your personal life, like your own social media, and share this information with the students who are in your care. I firmly believe that privacy is a new literacy that we need to be teaching our children and ourselves, both for our professional lives as educators, but also for our personal use. A great way to do this is to take a look at the Educator's Guide to Student Data Privacy that I mentioned before. You'll notice under our author names is a hyperlink, and so you can check out that guide for free and download it as a PDF, and we can share that out with the other resources later at the end of the webinar as well. And it's completely free. I've even used it as the basis for some professional learning that I've run at my school and that I've run at other schools, and also that I've run at conferences. It really breaks things down. In the guide, we point to when a teacher finds a new tool or new app that they really want, or website that they really want children to start using, there are 10 questions that we say that they should ask themselves before deciding to for sure adopt the tool. And I'm happy to share with you all 10 in the guide, but for the sake of time, we're really going to focus on the top 5, the ones that tend to elicit the most red flags, and the ones that you can kind of remember pretty easily. I think remembering 10 is tough. Remembering the 5 most important ones is probably your best bet. So tip 6 is that first question, and that's to learn to read the privacy policies and terms of use documents that come along with all of your services. We're going to practice this together. I have redacted a policy of an app that was requested by a teacher at my school for students to use, and it's an app that clearly was marketed to students, and I've redacted it. You can find it at this URL. So if you have another device nearby, or if you can split your screen during the webinar, go ahead and type in the bit.ly that's on screen. Jill, maybe you could type the bit.ly into the chat window too, so that once I change the screen, if people arrive a little later, they can take a look at it while we're going through it. I promise you I'm not going to read the entire privacy policy to you, but I am going to show you how to spot some really clear language that will help let you know whether the service has raised some data privacy red flags or whether it's something that you can jump into and use. So the first question of the top 5 is, does the product collect PII, personally identifiable information? That's that information that is really tied to your identity, that that helps a teacher, recognize which students are getting which scores, how long it's taking them to accomplish certain tasks. All that type of data is collected on these platforms. So in the policy that I just shared with you, as you're skimming through, there should be a section pretty close to the top that is called information we collect from you. Now, thankfully, this particular policy is pretty clear, and they say we may collect PII such as your name and email address. So that's not such a bad thing, right? Collecting your name and email address is the information they need in order for you to create your account, and so that's not too alarming. But in the next paragraph, they say information about your hardware and software may be automatically collected by us. This information can also include usage info that includes your interactions with services, device information such as unique device identifiers, operating system information, internet service provider, IP address, screen resolution, language, and the date and times of your logins and requests. None of this information is really unusual for services to collect. The only one that I see that's a little weird is screen resolution, but that could be related to them wanting to collect data about their users' experience and making sure that their product functions properly under lots of different screen resolutions. The time and date of each login and request is really common. Because I work partly under the academic side of my school and partly under IT, I know that in IT we often ask services for that date and time of each login request from our students. If our students are reporting that they're having a problem logging in, it can help us troubleshoot when they've been successful and when they've been unsuccessful. And so none of that is super alarming, but it is important to make sure that you see that next sentence after, that their intention there is to maintain the quality of the service and not just to collect information about you. The next question I have is, does the vendor scrub PII from deleted accounts? So if you decide to stop using a service and you have your students completely delete their accounts, or if a family decides that they're not comfortable with their child using that service and they want their child to delete their account, it is required by federal regulation that the vendor should scrub all the personally identifiable information from the account, and it should not be saved by them. Unfortunately, I don't have an example from this particular privacy policy to share with you where they say that. So this company leaves it unknown as to whether they scrub PII. And so if we do decide to use it, we're taking the risk that they may not, and they may continue to keep that data even when we've stopped using their service. The next question is, does the vendor share information, the information they collect, and with whom? So if you go ahead and look through the policy that I shared with you, you'll find a section that says third-party service providers. And they're pretty open about saying in this policy that we also use third-party service providers. Oftentimes, companies require that because they help them manage their data, they help them with cloud storage, they may help them consult on improving the quality of their product, all of those things. And they entrust storing some of your data and collecting it with these other parties. So if you were to decide to use this tool with your students, it would actually be your obligation to look through the privacy policies of each of the services that they list here to make sure that they are following privacy policy conditions that your school is comfortable with. That can be a big ask, and that's why no district should be requiring teachers to vet their own apps. Instead, this would be the obligation of either someone in your IT department or legal department, whoever is identified that way. But this could also help you understand why sometimes it takes a while for an app to be vetted, and so it's important to submit that request to your to the school officials who do it within a few weeks of your intended use rather than just the night before. They also say a little further down that they will disclose your personal information without notice if required to do so by law or in the good faith belief that such action is necessary. This is pretty standard language, at least up until if only required to by law. The good faith belief is a little looser than some other policies that I've seen. It is expected that they would release some of your PII if required to, like because of a warrant or something like that. But the good faith belief is a little looser, and that would be something that you may want to consider. Question 4 is, what are the age restrictions? Usually it could be found in the privacy policy, but more commonly it's found in the terms of use. In this case, there's a section that is called children, which is nice and clear. But this one says, our services are intended for general audiences, but they do not knowingly collect or use any PII from children under the age of 13. So in this case, that means that if you have students under the age of 13, and we know that the service does collect PII as part of the way they operate, that that your students should not be using this service at all. And if they find out that the users are 13, they'll remove them from our records and delete the records. And they would have to get specific parental consent before collecting personal information. So the red flag here is if this service was responsible as part of the account creation process, they would ask users to submit their birthday. And if their birthday indicates that they're under 13, it would not permit them to complete the login process. If you have or have ever heard of teachers having students just lie about their age or change the year, this is clearly violating this. And the reason that this particular guideline is in place is probably because the service is not COPPA compliant. Remember, COPPA is that Children Online Privacy and Protection Act. If the service did say that users under 13 could use it, that would be an indicator that they are likely to be COPPA compliant about the way they collect and store and preserve information. And they even go further and say, in the terms of use under eligibility, that users have to be 13 years of age to access their services, and that if they're under 13, they have to get the permission of the parent or guardian. Oftentimes, this means that the teacher can step in, not the teacher, the school can step in as the parent or guardian and give permission, but not all the time. So this would be something you would want to review with your school's officials who do the vetting for you. Something to note is that I think I mentioned earlier, this is the policy in terms of use for an app that was requested by one of our middle school teachers for the students to use. And it is specifically and clearly marketed to children and schools, and yet their eligibility agreement and policy around age says that under 13 is not permitted and under 18 is with parent permission only. So I find that really interesting, and it kind of tells me that this particular service has not thought carefully about putting in the protections that are necessary in order for them to market to their desired target audience, and that this service might not really be ready to be a tool that's used by a lot of schools despite their hopes. So you may need to either find another tool or contact the company and let them know that it's not satisfactory for them to have these terms, especially if they want schools to be able to use it. So the last question of the top 5 is, does the product display targeted ads? So it's very clearly against federal regulation to display targeted ads within websites and games and apps that are targeted to children who are under 13. And if they do, then they're not considered educational anymore, and they can no longer get that rating or that privilege of having that marker. So pop-up ads and targeted ads that basically indicate, especially the targeted ones, they're targeted because they're collecting personally identifiable information about the user to help them know enough about the user to specifically select ads that user is most likely to be interested in. That's why, for instance, my husband's Facebook looks a lot different than mine, because he's more likely to buy camping gear, which is what often pops up in his Facebook ads, whereas I'm more likely to buy workout clothes. And so I think you all understand what I'm saying here, because you've seen it on your own social media. And we want to make sure that our students are not being drawn in or distracted by those targeted ads when they're trying to get educational work done. Okay, so Tip 6 was actually 5 questions, so we're going to go back to our 10 tips, and I'm going to move on to tip 7, and that is to don't be afraid of student recommended tools, but do be aware. So this happens to me all the time. A student comes to school, has found a really cool app that they want to be able to use in class that isn't something that one of our teachers found or recommended. They bring it to us and they say, can I start using this in order to make videos instead of the one that, you know, the school has subscribed? Or can I use this tool to do some graphic design work instead of the app that my teacher has subscribed? And this isn't something where you have to automatically say no. I think out of fear, because of data privacy, a lot of schools or teachers tend to, but that's not what we recommend, especially at Connect Safely, where we want our users to feel empowered to try new things. Instead, what we do recommend is that you work with the student and help build their digital data privacy literacy. So start by expressing interest, because if they've come to you because they're excited about it, the last thing they want is to be shot down. So say, why are you so excited about it? Show me what it does. Show me what makes it better than other tools that you've tried. Secondly, ask them some questions to help walk them through whether the tool is collecting their personally identifiable information. So for instance, does it require that they create an account? If it does, it's surely collecting PII. Did it ask for parent permission, and did they have to check that box? When they did they actually ask for parent permission? Does the service share information with any other services? This is pretty easy to find by glancing through the privacy policy like I showed you. Usually there's a section about who they share information with, and there's a nice bulleted list, just like the sample that was there. And do they say anything about collecting location, contacts, information about your IP address, your operating system, and lots of other things? Just by walking students through this process, you'll be amazed how shocked they are with how much information apps and companies are collecting about them. They really have no idea how much information they're sharing simply by clicking around on their phones or on their Chromebooks or on their iPads. And you'll be helping them build that awareness by talking them through this. The next step is to tell them, before I can for sure give you permission to use that as part of our work, I have to run it through our IT department or our legal department. But I'm really excited that you're excited, and I'm going to get back to you as soon as I can. So the conversation is worth having, so that you're building their capacity and demonstrating to them that you're always thinking about these concerns as well. Okay, tip 8. Stay up to date with key resources that are available to you about data privacy. Some of my favorites that are worthwhile for all educators, of course, the Educator's Guide to Student Data Privacy that I've shared with you already. There's also, for ed tech and open education resources providers, there's the Student Data Privacy Pledge. This is a pledge that was organized by the Future Privacy Forum, and a lot of education technology tools have signed on to the pledge. And by signing on to the pledge, they are promising to ascribe by COPPA and FERPA and all of the other regulations that I've mentioned so far. Excuse me. And so whenever a new tool is requested by our teachers, that is my first stop in my vetting process. If they have signed on to it, then I know the vetting process is likely to go much more smoothly than if they have not. Excuse me. The last is the Student Data Privacy Alliance. The Alliance was actually started in my home state of Massachusetts by Cambridge Public Schools, and it was a statewide alliance that has now gone national. This alliance is a bunch of districts from all over the country that have shared values around data privacy and that have worked closely with the most commonly used ed tech tools to start holding one another accountable. So it's about the ed tech companies holding the schools accountable and the schools holding the ed tech companies accountable, so that we're all, protecting our children's data and making sure that we're ascribing to the same high standards. I saw that Jill just posted a reminder to send any questions for me through that chat window. I would really love to answer your questions at the end of this. I know this is a lot of information, so don't be shy. Even if it's a specific situation that you've encountered that's been puzzling, I can certainly give you guidance on that. Okay, our next tip Tip number 9, you may encounter parents who hear about privacy practices that are uncomfortable. The first ever EdTech company student data privacy breach happened about a year ago, and it was a pretty scary moment for a lot of parents. If parents come to you, if you're a heavy user of EdTech in your class, more so than some of your colleagues, and your parents catch wind of some of these breaches and scares, and they come to you and ask you about this, you don't have to know all of the answers, because remember that you're the one, you're not the one who has to vet all the tools, but you can share a little bit of what I talked about today, and you can direct them to some resources that are specifically created for parents. Connect Safely has a parent's guide to student data privacy that has a lot of the same information as the educator guide, but it's specifically targeted to parents and the questions that they can ask their children, that they can ask the companies that create the platforms that their children use, and that parents can ask both administrators and teachers. And so it would be great for you to review this too, so that you can know what kinds of questions to expect from parents who get access to that resource. Tip number 10, this is my final tip for you today. Please feel empowered after hearing all of this information, not afraid. Because you are a part of this webinar, you know more about data privacy than the teacher who is in the classroom next to you, and you have the power to share that information with them. Remember the acronyms, remember the stakeholders, remember those 5 questions to ask as you're skimming through privacy policies. Remember that technology does make our lives easier, and the data that it collects helps us really know our students much, much better. And remember that you should feel empowered by what the technology can do for you, not afraid of it. Final thoughts for you today. You can protect privacy and innovate in your classroom. There are plenty of education technology tools that are Student Data Privacy Pledge signatories, that abide completely by COPPA, and that are incredibly powerful and make teachers' lives easier and students' lives better. Digital literacy, not just the rules, the rights and wrongs, is an essential life skill. And so having those conversations with students about the tools that they're excited to use and how they can tell whether they're safe and they're going to protect their data is really important. Just like we build in naturally character education into our lessons every day, it's important for us to build in these digital literacy conversations when they're appropriate. And finally, it's important to remember that all stakeholders have rights and a role to play. So you as a teacher have a right to be able to access the digital tools and platforms that you need to do your job. Students have rights to be creative and access the information that they need online. And we all have a right to our data privacy being protected, both by the companies that produce the tools that we use, and also by the administrators who are responsible for that vetting. So as long as all the stakeholders know their role and work in balance and continue communicating, I think this data privacy thing, we're going to get through it together for sure. So I want to just say thank you to all of you for hanging with me. I'm excited to take your questions. And I want to hand it over to Jill so that she can close it out and moderate the questions.
Okay, thank you, Kerry, for all the great information and tips that you shared today. I know we have several questions to get to in the Q&A, but I'd just like to take a minute to share some details about It's Learning and its commitment to student data privacy. I have included in the GoToWebinar console an eSchool news article titled How to Find an LMS that Supports Student Data Privacy and Data Security. It is available for download. In the article, the Director of Instructional Technology for Raytown Quality Schools in Missouri shares why her district, just one of 13 nationwide to receive the Consortium for Student Networking, or COSN, Trusted Learning Environment Seal, selected It's Learning to support student data privacy and data security. I have also included an FAQ document from COSN on the Trusted Learning Environment Seal. Some of you may be aware of GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, the European Union's stringent new regulation on data protection and privacy. As a Norwegian-based company that is required to be GDPR compliant by May 25th of this year, It's Learning is ahead of the curve. If you would like to learn more about our award-winning LMS, visit itslearning.com. We will now start with the Q&A portion of today's presentation. Our first question for you, Kerry, is coming from Derek, and he says that he uses various apps and websites with his sixth graders, and he's not sure which ones, if any, have been vetted. What is the best way for him to find out?
So Derek, I think one thing to remember is that if it's an app that's been recommended or required for you to use by school administration, like an online gradebook or an LMS, or a communication tool that's standard across the school or district, you're probably good to go and you don't need to worry. If it's an app that you've recently adopted and haven't really shared out with explicitly with administration, or maybe it's even something that you've been using for a long time and that they know that you use, but you're not sure if it's actually been vetted, it would be a great idea to accumulate a list of those and just share it with whomever is your direct administrator and ask that question. Have these apps been vetted for student data privacy and security by our IT department? Should I be talking to someone about this? You know, the students are creating accounts and using it. I really love it, but I also want to make sure my students are protected. I think if you start that conversation, it'll build some awareness among the administrators, if there isn't awareness already, but more likely than not, you'll find out that they know that you've been using it and it's been vetted and you're good to go. Asking never hurts though.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question came in from Seth. The question is, this would be a great topic for my grade level professional learning community. Who would you recommend I bring into the conversation from the district level?
Yeah, I love having this as a PLC topic. I think that really helps build capacity in educators, and I think it would really get the conversation going throughout the school. I think at first a great place to start would be to share some of the resources that I shared with you to make sure that everybody has some foundational knowledge. So before bringing in someone from the district level, it might be good for everyone in your PLC to read the Educator's Guide to Student Data Privacy. It might be great for everyone to review the Student Data Privacy Pledge that EdTech companies are signing on to. And that way everyone has at least a basic understanding. And then when you bring in those district level folks, you'll have some concrete questions to ask about what your district is doing and how you as teachers can support that work. I would contact your administrators, maybe your direct administrator first, and ask, who's responsible for vetting and tracking all the tools that we use and how they collect data, and would they be willing to come in and give us some insight into what that process is like and how it works. I know that I am involved on that team that does the vetting at my school, and I have done presentations to our middle school teachers, to our academic leadership, and to other stakeholder groups about what that process involves and why it's so important. As I said before, not because I expect our teachers to be doing the vetting themselves, but I do want them to be aware. It's the reason that I wanted to do this webinar with you all today as well. So start with your direct administrator, find out who is responsible and who's on that team, and then get that conversation started.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. Another question came in from Sarah, and her question is, what is the best way for me to respond to parent concerns around their child's data privacy and security?
Yeah, I think one thing to remember is that when parents come to us with these concerns, it's often from a place of fear. So I think the first thing to do would be to acknowledge that it can be a little bit of a scary topic when we hear about data breaches in the news, and to reassure them that it's something that you think about and are concerned about as well. That's a great way to get the conversation, on a calmer level. And then I would share with them the resource that I mentioned earlier, the Parent's Guide to Student Data Privacy, that's available at Connect Safely, because it can help make them feel informed and empowered to ask more specific questions rather than what are you doing to protect privacy? Because I think that's a big question that the answer is that we're doing a lot of things, and this could be a very long conversation, but it will help you and the parent get a more nuanced understanding about what are their precise concerns and fears so that you can respond accordingly. It's also really great to reassure them that you talk about data privacy with their children so that they know that, not only is it something that you think about and are concerned about, but it's something that you're interested in helping their child understand so that they have that life skill moving forward.
Great, thank you, Kerry. We have another question. This one is from Michael, and he says, this is a very timely topic that my 8th graders are very interested in. Are there lesson planning resources on this topic or ways you might involve students in learning about their rights?
Sure. So we actually have a 6th grader at my school who's super tuned in to privacy and data, and every time we introduce a new tool to his 6th grade class, he's always raising his hand and asking, you know, if I create an account, what does this mean? How will it track my data? And I love that interest and awareness in some of our younger students. So I'm excited to hear that your 8th graders are tuned into it. It's certainly a topic that's in the news as well. There are resources available. As a matter of fact, we developed some resources on digital citizenship in general at my school, and specifically the topic of privacy and security is one of the areas that we drilled into. So if you go to digcit, and I can put this in the chat window, digcit.sjp.weebly.com, you'll find our entire teacher training program on digital citizenship. And then if you click on the deep dive pages, you'll find there's a page on privacy and security, and there is a whole host of resources with lesson plan ideas, discussion starters, video clips, lots and lots of things that you can use to structure a lesson on data privacy with your students. That would be my recommendation to get you started.
Okay, terrific, Kerry. I think we've run through all of our audience questions, so we can wrap up the Q&A. I want to thank everyone for listening and also for your participation during today's webinar. I also want to thank Kerry again for sharing her expertise with us today. There will be a few follow-up questions for you at the end of the webinar, and we will be sending you a link to a recording of today's presentation, along with the Educator's Guide to Student Data Privacy that Kerry co-authored. For more information on It's Learning, please visit itslearning.com, and have a great day.